Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling code switching. It's this really interesting idea about how we all, shift how we talk and act in different situations.
Yeah.
And you, our listener, shared a great mix of stuff on this. Articles about business English for learners, really personal stories from places like Reddit about identity, workplace dynamics.
A real range.
Totally. So our mission today is basically to unpack what code switching really is, figure out why people do it, and look at the impact it has, professionally and socially.
Absolutely. And we've got a good set of sources to help us dig in. There's advice for non-native speakers, those Reddit threads you mentioned, which are super candid.
Yeah, those look interesting.
Perspectives from HR, business viewpoints, a personal essay from someone in fundraising that was quite powerful, academic takes, even Wikipedia's definition to sort of frame it.
Great. So for you listening, someone who wants to get a good handle on things quickly, this should be really useful. We're trying to connect all these pieces, get those aha moments about how communication actually works under the surface.
Yeah, without getting bogged down.
Exactly. Okay, so let's jump in. First things first. What is code switching exactly? How are we defining it here?
Well, at its core, it's about adjusting how we present ourselves depending on the context. But what's really key, and what a lot of the sources emphasize, is that it's not just about language.
Right, not just bilingual people switching languages.
No, not at all. It's your whole communication style, your accent, the words you choose, sure. But also, your mannerisms, your tone, even your body language or how you dress. It's a much broader thing.
Okay, so adapting to fit in, basically.
Pretty much. Adapting to fit the cultural norms or expectations of a specific situation. You see that mentioned in sources from Preply Business, Indeed, Berkeley. They all highlight this wider view.
Got it. So talking differently to your boss than you do to your friends. That's code switching.
That's a classic example, yeah. Or adjusting your body language in a formal meeting versus, say, grabbing coffee with a coworker. It's navigating those unwritten rules.
Makes sense.
And Wikipedia actually offers a useful distinction. They talk about situational versus metaphorical code switching.
Okay, what's the difference there?
Situational is when the actual social situation changes, prompting a shift. Like maybe someone new joins your group and you switch to a language everyone understands.
Right.
Metaphorical is more about adding nuance within a situation, maybe using a more formal register to show respect, even if the topic stays the same. It enriches the interaction, you could say.
Ah, okay. So chatting casually, the boss walks up, you straighten up and switch to more formal language. That's situational because the context changed.
Exactly, the dynamic shifted. And I liked how Caitlin Rich put it in her essay. She described it as bridging between our own cultures and the cultures that surround us.
Yeah.
That feels like a really good way to think about the purpose behind it.
Yeah, bridging. I like that. Okay, so let's zoom in on one specific area where this comes up a lot. Professional English learners. We had a source specifically on that, right?
We did. The Code Switching for Business article.
Yeah.
It gives some really practical, hands-on advice for non-native speakers navigating, corporate environments.
Like specific word choices.
Yeah, exactly. It lists common sort of everyday English phrases and suggests more formal alternatives that might land better in a business context.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Instead of saying, I got your email, it suggests, I received your email. Or switching from, I need to ask about, to something like, I'd like to request information regarding.
Okay, subtle shifts.
Things like using implement instead of use, or discuss instead of talk about, contact instead of get in touch. Just nudging the language towards that professional standard.
Right. And the article made a point about written communication being potentially easier sometimes.
Yeah, that was interesting. For some non-native speakers, writing gives them that extra moment to, process and choose the precise word, ensure the tone is right, compared to the faster pace of speaking and listening.
That makes sense. You have time to refine it.
But as the article also points out, it's a balance, right? You don't want to sound too formal, especially with colleagues you know well. It could create distance, so it's about judging the situation.
Finding that sweet spot. Okay. Now, let's shift gears a bit to the more personal side of this. The Reddit discussions, especially the one from Brack Ladies, seem to really get into the emotional side of code switching.
Oh, absolutely. Very powerful stuff there. A big theme was this deep desire to just stop, to be authentic.
Yeah.
But alongside that, there's this very real fear of being judged negatively, often based on racial stereotypes if they don't adapt their speech or behavior. Someone mentioned being called ghetto just for being Black and speaking quickly.
Wow. That really highlights the pressure, doesn't it?
It does. And what was striking was the variety of feelings within that community. Some people framed code switching almost as a skill, a necessary survival tactic.
A tool they learn to use.
Right. But others talked about how exhausting it is, feeling like you constantly have to hide part of who you are. Just draining.
I can imagine. And it seemed like upbringing and community background played a role, too.
Definitely. And age came up. Some felt like after doing it for years, they were just tired of it, especially at work. There was even talk about it being a kind of trauma response to systemic issues.
That puts a really heavy weight on it.
It does. Then you look at the Rask Black people thread and you get another layer. Someone shared feeling frustrated because people accused them of talking white when they felt they were just speaking normally, reflecting their own upbringing.
So being judged from multiple directions, potentially.
Exactly. And that sparked a lot of conversation about how there's no single right way for a Black person to sound. People pushed back hard against policing language, emphasizing that, AAVE and Standard American English are both valid dialects.
Right. Someone made the point that speaking standard English doesn't make you less Black, or that questioning someone for not using AAVE is also problematic.
Precisely. And there was that anecdote, too, about someone with an afro facing stereotypes and then more judgment when their speech didn't match those stereotypes. You boxed in.
Yeah. And someone else described the feeling as being two-faced. That really captures the internal conflict, doesn't it?
It really does. But then, counterintuitively, another person shared being accused of code switching when they were just using their natural voice, which shows how subjective and often unfair these perceptions can be.
Man, it's complicated.
It really is. And these personal stories feed directly into why people code switch, especially in the workplace, which is where sources like Preplay Business and Indeed come in.
So what are the main drivers in a professional setting, according to them?
Well, a big one is just fitting in with the dominant culture or language of the workplace. If everyone communicates a certain way, there's often pressure, spoken or unspoken, to adapt.
To be understood, to be accepted.
Right. And also for clear communication, especially in technical fields. Prepley mentioned colleagues in Madrid switching to English for work talk, even though Spanish was their shared native language, just for efficiency with jargon.
Ah, interesting. Using it as a practical tool.
Yeah, but it's not always about work tasks. It can also be about connecting personally, switching to a shared native language or dialect to chat about non-work stuff, making that connection.
Okay. And what about strategic uses?
Prepley mentioned that too, using code switching consciously to achieve a goal, maybe in a negotiation, or just navigating different internal social contexts, like switching between a formal presentation mode and casual lunch chat, or even switching languages to make someone else feel included.
Right. And then there are the more defensive reasons, like dealing with stereotypes.
Yeah, better up, and Indeed touched on that. Trying to actively counter negative stereotypes associated with your group, or conversely, sometimes trying to lean into a stereotype strategically, though that's complex, but often it's driven by the fear of confirming negative biases.
That sounds incredibly stressful.
It can be. And sometimes, as Betterup noted, it's not even a fully conscious thing. You just absorb the patterns of the people you're around. Or code mixing blending languages because one expresses something better than the other.
So it's a mix of conscious strategy, subconscious adaptation, and sometimes just trying to avoid discrimination or get ahead professionally.
Exactly. Seeking opportunities, belonging, cultural capital. Berkeley mentions these as motivations too.
Okay, so we see why it happens.
Yeah.
What about the effects, the pros and cons for people and for businesses?
Well, from the business side, Prepley suggests some clear potential benefits. Better communication in diverse teams, for one.
Makes sense.
A stronger sense of connection between colleagues, potentially leading to a more respectful culture, and maybe even better employee retention if people feel understood.
So it can be a positive force for collaboration.
It seems so. Blue Links and SHRM also highlighted it as a potentially powerful tool for building relationships across different backgrounds. And HBR suggested that being adaptable in your communication can just make you more effective, more persuasive.
Okay, those are the upsides. But what are the costs? Especially for the individual doing the switching.
Yeah, that's where the other side comes in, and it seems significant. The emotional labor involved is a big one, mentioned across sources like Prepley, Berkeley. Indeed, BetterUp.
Just tiring.
Very. Constantly monitoring yourself, adjusting. It can lead to feeling inauthentic, confused about your own identity, and just straight up burnout.
And social pressures, too. Berkeley mentioned being accused of acting white.
Right. That adds another layer of complexity and stress. Caitlin Rich's essay really hit hard on the cost the energy spent prioritizing the comfort of the dominant culture.
And she also pointed out the cost of not code switching. Right. That it could hold you back.
Yeah, that's the catch-22. Not switching could mean missing out on promotions, opportunities, even funding, depending on the context.
Which brings us right to the DEI angle, diversity, equity, inclusion. How does code switching fit into that conversation?
Well, it becomes a real problem, as several sources point out, when people feel forced to code switch, when it feels like a requirement for acceptance or success rather than a choice.
Because that goes against the whole idea of valuing different identities.
Exactly. If the workplace culture implicitly or explicitly demands that you suppress parts of your cultural identity to fit in, that's fundamentally at odds with DEI principles. Better Up and HBR framed it as this difficult dilemma. Assimilate for career success or be your authentic self and risk hitting a ceiling.
So it's a systemic issue, not just an individual choice.
Very much so.
Okay, given all that complexity, what are the recommendations? What can companies or even individuals do about this?
There are quite a few suggestions. On the organizational side, BlueLink says companies really need to look inward at their culture. Are they creating pressure to conform?
How would they know?
By looking at representation at all levels. For one, if leadership is homogenous, that sends a message. They also suggest actively promoting diversity and fostering inclusion as separate but linked goals. Create an environment where different styles are genuinely welcome.
And Propley agreed. Focus on inclusion, not regulating the switching itself.
Right. They suggested fostering an atmosphere where people feel okay using their own languages sometimes. Maybe managers could even model code switching themselves, adapting their style for clarity with diverse teams. Things like multilingual communications or language training could also help.
Practical steps.
Yeah. Indeed, focused on creating safe spaces for communication, educating the whole team about different cultures, making diversity just normal, not a special focus, and actually talking to employees about their experiences.
Opening that dialogue.
Exactly. Better Up stressed that leaders need to educate themselves about how code switching affects people. And they talked about diluting the dominant culture, not erasing it, but making it just one of many, through diverse hiring and making sure different voices actually get heard.
And Caitlin Rich had specific advice for funders, right?
Yes, particularly in the nonprofit space. She urged them to look past superficial things like grammar or vernacular in grant proposals and focus on the actual mission and impact. Prioritize equity. Understand that the goal isn't just the funder's comfort level.
That's a powerful point.
Yeah.
What about support for individuals feeling the burden?
Berkeley listed resources like diversity offices, counseling, student groups, basically. Finding support systems is crucial if you're feeling the strain.
But ultimately, the responsibility lies with the organization, the system.
That's the strong message from Rich and others, yes. Systemic change is needed, not just individual coping strategies.
Okay, so wrapping this up, our deep dive shows code switching is, well, it's layered. It connects to communication, culture, power. It can be a skill, sure.
A tool.
But when it feels forced, driven by pressure to conform or avoid prejudice, the cost to individuals, their well-being, their sense of self can be really high.
Absolutely. And organizations clearly have a big role in creating spaces where it's a choice, not a survival tactic.
So for you listening, hopefully, this gave you a clear picture of code switching and why it matters in so many parts of life and work. Just being aware of these dynamics can change how you see interactions.
Definitely. And maybe a final thought to chew on. Think about your own environments, your workplace, social circles, family even. Are there subtle, unspoken rules about how people should communicate?
Yeah.
How might those norms be influencing people, maybe without anyone realizing it? And what small shifts, maybe even just awareness, could help make those spaces feel a bit more authentic, more inclusive for everyone?
Something to think about.